Hello everyone. Now, if you've been following my channel for some time now, you will know that for the last 2 years I have attended the London Film Festival and reviewed any movies that I saw at the festival on this channel. And thankfully, this year's festival still went ahead, but due to a certain pandemic that occurred this year, things are a little bit different. Some of the films were shown the same as usual in London-based cinemas, whereas everything else for the festival was shown digitally via the BFI player. And obviously, because I don't live in London, the best option for me was to choose films that were only being shown digitally, which is what I did this year. And believe it or not, by doing it that way, I was able to see way more films than I've ever done at the festival. Last year I saw 2 films, the year before that I only saw 1 film, whereas this year, because of the easiness of just watching them digitally from home, I was able to watch a total of 5 movies this year. So because of the amount of movies that I saw and the fact that I've been very, very busy recently, I thought the best thing to do would be to simply do a roundup video of all the movies that I saw rather than doing individual reviews for those films. I just think it would be easier that way. So without any further ado, here are my thoughts on the 5 films that I saw at this year's London Film Festival. The first movie that I saw at the festival was Kajillionaire by Miranda July. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know what to expect going into this one because I've never seen a Miranda July movie before. I know of her filmography and I have a rough idea of what her style is, but apart from that, I had no idea what I was getting myself in for with this movie. And I've got to say, even though this movie did start out a little bit wonky, by the end of the film, I was thoroughly on board with it. This is definitely one of those movies that gets better as it goes on. The first act kind of was a bit hit and miss for me. There were certain things that did work and there were certain things that didn't, but by the end of the movie, I was fully on board with everything it was trying to do, and I genuinely really liked what it was setting up with its themes and messages, and also the characters got a lot better as the movie went on as well. The ideas, themes and messages on display in this movie worked really well for me, and I thought they actually made the characters a lot more interesting than they initially were. The performances are all really, really good, my favourites being Richard Jenkins, Evan Rachel Wood and Gina Rodriguez. To be honest though, there's not a single bad performance in the entire movie. Their performances are just right for this style of film, because I feel like with this type of movie, the performances have to be done in a very specific way, so the fact that they were able to pull that off without it feeling ever too tacky or too cheesy, I thought was a big accomplishment. And also, there are just specific moments and specific scenes that I thought worked brilliantly in this movie. Even if there were certain overall things in the movie that I don't think worked, I can definitely say that there are specific moments in the film that really, really had my full attention. Like, for example, there is one scene in particular, I won't go into too much detail because of spoilers, but there is one scene in particular which involves this old man in a house which they go into, and that whole scene is brilliant. Like, it's so masterfully done and perfectly balances on the line of being morbidly funny but also very sweet as well. And yeah, that whole scene was brilliant, and there's a couple of scenes like that throughout the movie that are just pure gold. However, there were a few things in the movie that didn't quite gel with me. The movie relies heavily on awkward humour, and for me, when I was watching the movie, I thought that that type of humour was rather hit and miss. There are some points where it does work, and there are other points where you can see what they were trying to do, but it doesn't quite hit the mark it was going for. In terms of other issues that I had with the movie, there are just overall some things that didn't quite work for me, and those were mostly in the first act of the film, when it was still trying to find its footing. I feel like it takes a good 20 minutes, or 20 to 30 minutes anyway, for the movie to really get into a groove and know what it's doing. But those first 20 minutes definitely feel like it's still trying to figure out what it is. And on top of that, there is some really obvious and quite bad audio mixing in the first half of the movie. Now, usually that isn't something that I'm able to point out unless it is blatantly obvious. Which it was in this movie, and I think purely because I was watching it from the comfort of my own home with headphones on, I noticed it probably more than I would if I saw it in the cinema. But yeah, there was some really terrible audio mixing, especially in the first half of the movie. In the end, though, I did thoroughly enjoy Kajillionaire. Even though it's not perfect, I do think this is a very good movie that I can see myself thinking about more and more as the months go on. Like, I do feel like this is one of those movies which is going to grow on me over the course of the year, which is why I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's not a perfect movie, like I said, but it is very good when it knows what it's doing. The next movie that I saw was The Reason I Jump, which is an experimental documentary based off of a book of the same name, written by a Japanese kid who has very severe autism to the point where he can't even speak. And the book basically is from his perspective. It's him describing what an autistic person feels and sees every day of their life. And the documentary is pretty much meant to be the visual and audible version of that. It's meant to kind of show from a visual and audio standpoint what autistic people see and feel. Now, believe it or not, I do actually have mild Asperger's, and a couple years ago I tried making a short film called Sensory, which was pretty much aiming to do the exact same thing as this documentary. It was a very short but snappy depiction of autism and from an autistic person's perspective, but even looking back at that short film, there are a lot of things I could improve, and it doesn't quite get the message across as clearly as I probably wanted it to, whereas this documentary does. And I'm just going to say it now, this documentary should be essential viewing for pretty much everyone, because the way this movie looks at autism, and not just how an autistic person's mind processes everything, but also looking at examples of actual people around the world and how they deal with it, I think all of that put together, this makes this movie a very interesting and engaging watch that thankfully tries to break down the stigma that is attached to autism, whilst at the same time trying to get you as a viewer to understand how an autistic person's mind works a bit better. And by combining those two aspects, I think this documentary does so much right, and I do think this is something that as many people as possible should try and see. One thing that this documentary does that I was really glad that it did was that it doesn't just show the negative side to autism that everyone is most aware of. It also shows the joy and intricacies of autism and how the mind of an autistic person works, and how that can also lead to happy moments and joyous moments. I also loved how it uses the book that it's based on as kind of a literal structure to the film. You'll constantly have this narration reading extracts from the book that will explain a specific perspective or a specific thing that autistic people have or do. And then it will cut to these real life people that have autism to kind of back up that thing that it was just trying to explain. And the fact that it does that constantly throughout the film, I think puts everything into perspective so much better than just having someone reading the book out loud. I think it kind of puts everything to perspective in a very realistic and grounded way, and I think that is the best aspect this movie could have possibly gone for. Also, the whole selling point of this movie, where it's trying to put you in the shoes of someone with autism through visuals and audio, I think is very well executed in this movie. I would have liked to have seen a more heavier implementation of those experimental aspects in the movie, but when it is integrated into the film, it does work very well and gets specific points across. But considering that was the main selling point of the documentary, I guess. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from it, and I suppose that is my one minor issue with it. I would have liked to have seen them fully delve into that experimental side of filmmaking just a little bit more in this documentary to kind of fully get across that, you know, that concept that it was properly going for, to make you feel like someone with autism through the visuals and audio alone. Like I said, when it does do it in the film, it is very well implemented, but I just wanted to see a little bit more of that. Overall, though, the reason I jump is essential viewing, not just to fully understand autism, but just for documentary fans in general. This is a very well-made documentary that I feel like everyone needs to see, which is why I'm giving it a 10. Despite that minor criticism that I give the movie, I still think everything else that it goes to tackle is pretty much handled in the best way possible. The next movie that I saw was Mogul Mowgli, starring Riz Ahmed and directed by Bazam Tariq. I apologise if I've butchered that name, but for a bit of context, the plot of this movie is about a rapper played by Riz Ahmed who is just starting to get somewhere with his career, like he's just about to hit the big time, but when he's about to go on another tour, this condition then starts to attack his body, basically shutting down most of his muscles. And the movie is basically him trying to come to terms with this condition, whilst also trying to make sure his rap career gets off the ground a bit more. And also there is a lot of subtext in regards to him coming to terms with his religion and how the country that he lives in, which is the UK, deals with, you know, that race and that religion and their beliefs. I was really excited for this movie because I've been a fan of Riz Ahmed's since Four Lions back in 2010, and everything he's done since then, whether it's Nightcrawler or Rogue One or The Night Of, has genuinely impressed me more and more. And the fact that this is his first proper movie where he's given the full stage, so to speak, and he's there front and center at the front of this movie. He absolutely knocks it out of the park, and this is easily a career best performance from him. Like, in this movie, he really puts everything into this movie, and that's probably because this film to him was a pure passion project. Like, he didn't just act in the movie, but I think he also had writing credits on the film as well. And that, alongside the fact that a lot of the songs that are used in the movie are actually taken from the album that he released back in March earlier this year. And that just another thing as well. The guy is not just a good actor, he's a brilliant rapper as well. You can tell when he is rapping in this movie that he is putting all of his energy into every single word that he says. There is such ferocity and energy behind every single word that comes out of his mouth, and he really means everything he says. And the rapping alongside his performance in this movie just shows that he is fully committed to getting these messages across, because they are very important messages that this film tackles, and I think it handles them all in very, very effective ways. That being said, though, the directing by Bazam Tariq is absolutely brilliant as well, and especially considering this is his directorial debut, I was blown away by what I was seeing. The movie almost kind of feels a bit like a fever dream come to life, and that is and that's down to a mixture of different things, from the way the movie is shot to the aspect ratio that they use, which I think is 4:3, where it's kind of condensed to not a full square, but it's pretty much a square. But not just that, but also the down and the grounded and dirty look that this movie has, along with some very vibrant and kind of colourful moments as well. And all of those things blended together kind of create this very unsettling tone right from the word go. And that, along with these very disturbing, I guess you can say, dream sequences that just create this very unnerving tone right from the word go, and they all kind of blend together very seamlessly. That's one thing I was slightly worried about, because I'd heard that there was some very surreal imagery in this movie, and I didn't think it would blend well with the main plot that was going on and the realistic drama that was happening. But because it pretty much sticks to a consistent tone throughout, and it's consistent cinematography and the way it's shot as well, it all works pretty well, and it all flows together very seamlessly, and never once did any of the dream sequences feel tacked on or cheesy. They all felt very purposeful, and were also very disturbing as well at times. But yeah, this movie was really good. The psychological drama mixed together with the claustrophobic and at times uneasy moments that happened throughout this movie worked really well for me, which is why I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. This was a really, really good movie that I think a lot more people should see. The second to last movie on my list was Another Round, directed by Thomas Vinterberg, starring Mads Mikkelsen. I was really excited for this film, purely because the last time Thomas Vinterberg and Mads Mikkelsen collaborated on a movie together was 2012's The Hunt, and in my opinion, that movie is one of the best straight-up dramas of the last decade. So when I heard they were working on another film together, I made every chance I could to make sure I could see it as soon as possible. And the fact that it was on the London Film Festival list kind of just confirmed that I needed to see this. And I've got to say, even though Another Round is a completely different beast to The Hunt, because that movie was very depressing and realistic and very grounded in reality, this movie, on the other hand, though it is still very realistic in what it portrays, it's a lot more uplifting. And I've got to say, this movie was probably my favourite film that I saw at the festival. It's uplifting, it's joyous, but also manages to weave in emotion, drama, and humour all the way throughout the film in a way that never feels forced. It all weaves together so consistently and perfectly, and this movie is just so good. I can't quite put my finger on how or why everything works the way it does in this movie, but it just works. Everything fits together so seamlessly in this film that it just works really well on a number of different levels that I could spend ages talking about. But in short summary, this movie is just really, really good. I think one reason why this movie works as well as it does is because of the four main actors. Their friendship pulls this movie together and feels so genuine and real, so that by the time they go ahead with the experiment that they attempt in this movie, it doesn't just feel like something that's cropped up for the sake of the plot to kick in. It feels like they are genuinely on board with this, and yeah, I feel like if their performances weren't as good as they were, this movie would just fall apart. But because they feel like friends that have known each other for years and there is such a strong bond there, it just makes this movie work so much better than, say, if it was handled by a less capable director and actors. When this movie embraces the joys of its premise and characters, it does so in such an unfiltered manner that you can't help but smile. But that being said, the movie is not afraid to show its tender side, and when it does show that, it can be very gripping and very emotional when it needs to, which is why I'm going to give Another Round a 10 out of 10. Like I said, this was my favourite movie that I saw of the whole festival, and it was just absolutely brilliant from start to finish. Also, Mads Mikkelsen dancing at the end of this movie was pretty much just the icing on the cake at that point. The last movie that I saw was Possessor by Brandon Cronenberg. Now again, this was another movie that I didn't quite know what I was getting myself in for. All I knew about the movie was its concept of people using this machine to possess other people's minds to get away with killing targets, and also the fact that it was directed by Brandon Cronenberg, the son of the famous body horror director from the 80s and 70s. That is literally all I knew going into this movie. I knew it would be gory, and I knew it would be kind of surreal and trippy. And after watching the movie, yeah, it's definitely both of those things, but my god, this movie is fucked. Like, Jesus Christ, this movie. What worked for me the most in this film were the performances, which are great across the board, the very slick and stylish direction, and the rather clever storytelling that I genuinely wasn't expecting. Like, I was expecting it to be somewhat intricately handled with this film because of, you know, the concepts, but the way this movie handles it genuinely had me very impressed throughout the entire runtime, and the storytelling in this movie is one thing that kept me engaged, along with the performances and along with the direction. The score is also really good as well. But that being said, those are not really the aspects that people are here for. They're here for the gore. They're here for the violence. And when this movie fully commits to the violence and gore and the practical effects, which there are plenty of, and it is a joy to see those practical effects in full force in this movie, when it fully commits to them, it can be quite hard to watch. Like, there are a few moments in particular where the violence is so graphically detailed that most other directors would probably just show a quick glimpse of it and then cut away. Brandon Cronenberg doesn't do that in a few specific moments throughout this movie. He just kind of forces you to look at these things as they're happening. And though they are very unsettling, they do work for the sake of the plot. I've heard some people say that the violence goes too far in this movie, and I can understand why they're saying that. But as I was watching the movie, I completely understood why all the violence was there. Actually, one of my favourite aspects of this movie is probably something that not a lot of people are probably going to give a crap about, and that is these really stylish and really trippy visual sequences that just kind of pop up here and there throughout the movie, and really do add this disjointed and uneasy feel to the movie, and just kind of amplifies it the more it goes on. And there's a few specific examples of those sequences that I thought were really cool to see. Overall though, Possessor is a slick, stylish, and very gory sci-fi horror movie that knows what its premise is and sticks to it as much as it can. And I actually really enjoyed it, despite how disturbing it can be at times, which is why I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. This movie is not going to be for everyone. When it eventually gets a wider release, I know that some people are absolutely going to hate this film, and other people are not even going to bother watching it because of, you know, the gore in this film and the intense violence. But that being said, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and the main things that kept me on board throughout, even when it looked like it was about to lose me, or, you know, have me lose interest, the main things that kept me on board were the performances, the direction, and just the overall tone as well. Also, what is with the amount of vaping in this movie? Like, there is an uncomfortable amount of people vaping in this film. Like, during some really dramatic scenes, someone will just pull out their, you know, EpiPen and vape. Not EpiPen, their fucking e-cigarette. So guys, those are my thoughts on all of the movies that I saw at the 2020 London Film Festival. If you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. If you've seen any of these movies, or if you're excited to see them when they eventually do get a wider release, then please let me know any of that in the comments below. I'd love to talk about that. Yeah, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, then please do so, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.